Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It is time to have a look at a devblog looking at the hull armor of the Abrams, or just the general armor of the Abrams overall. After the post they did yesterday, talking about the Abrams and also a bunch of other vehicles, they also said they were going to do some follow-up devblogs about it, and it's basically because there's a ton of people who are angry at the state of the Abrams, because they feel the armor should be in a better position compared to what it is right now, and also since it doesn't really get any upgrades if you have a look at the earlier M1 Abrams to the later M1A2 SEPs when it comes to the hull armor. Obviously the turret gets a decent upgrade, but the chassis itself doesn't really get upgraded at all. So what you have is increased weight, but not necessarily increased protection, especially when it comes to the hull itself. So they made a devblog, basically going through it to try and quell fears of what's going on, and kind of give their perspective. Will this change anything? No. The people who are annoyed at this will continue to be annoyed, and if anything, this is just adding more fuel to their fire, just like we saw earlier in this year and also in previous years. So the people that this is targeted to, it won't make a difference with. But I think it's always good to actually clarify where you're, sat around, and also just give kind of a public post about, okay, this is what we're working with. If this is not, good enough, or if there is any other things, bring it along so we can have a look. So most of the post is focused on the hull of it, but also at the same time is focused on some other interesting areas. The first one is, of course, the actual turret itself and depleted uranium, and the idea of DU armor being on the Abrams. So they're completely fine with the fact that most of the sources that they've seen show that the depleted uranium is in the turret cheeks of the more modern Abrams. The issue or the contention is not the turret. It never has been with the Abrams. It is the hull itself which has this problem where it doesn't get increased protection over the different Abrams variants that we have in the game. And also, at the same time, this is where the crux of the situation comes in, right here. And this is why it's a little bit skew with. There is a disagreement whether the depleted uranium inserts or the depleted uranium armor was used on production variants of the Abrams and not just experimental ones. For example, they have increased the armor package for the Abrams for later variants in the game. So they believe that, due to their sources, that the turret was upgraded in the production variants. The problem is they don't have any sources which are reliable, which show that the same or similar upgrades happened to the chassis. Most of the sources, at least that I've read about the Abrams, and I'm sure that the devs or whoever deals with it has read about the Abrams, point towards the fact that the DU inserts were tested on the hull through some experimental variants, but do not clarify whether these actually went to production or not. And this is the huge debacle. So they tested it, they went through with the testing, and obviously with the testing they decided to add it to the turrets. But did they add it to the whole front? There seems to be no source which confidently states, or a primary source I should say, which confidently states that this is what happened. And until that exists, the Gaijin team are not happy with putting in the armor into the chassis because they don't want it to be wrong. As I've said previously, I personally don't care about this. I think at this point, if you're trying to model stuff realistically, we don't know the true effectiveness of the DU package anyway, or the Chobham armor, which is around it as well. Why even bother with all of this, and why not just increase the values to a point where you feel it is balanced, instead of screwing with a bunch of other kind of metrics with certain vehicles? But yeah, so basically what ended up happening is they've collated a bunch of factors together. So if you have a look at the Abrams weight growth, which is something that they're looking at. The idea is, of course, the weight of the Abrams increases over time because they add more stuff to it. If you have a look at the standard Abrams compared to the M1A1, the M1A2, the M1A2 SEP V1 and V2, there are massive weight increases between them. And their idea is, because there's these massive weight increases, if they also added an armor package on top of this, this would actually overload the vehicle's torsion bars, specifically the first pair, meaning that it wouldn't be able to hold the weight. So through their ideas of how much pressure, or how much, how much force is going through the torsion bars or the suspension system of the Abrams, if on top of this additional weight there was this this armor on top of it, it would just break the vehicle. So that's basically how, you know, they go through it. And it says the implementation of low density mass efficient fillers would inevitably require an increase in size, which is also not observed in the M1 Abrams. So it isn't just the fact that it wouldn't be able to hold the weight of this armor, it is also the fact that the Abrams itself hasn't increased in size. Therefore, if you had this armor package which was inside of the Abrams, it would have to be the same size as the previous, it would have to be very small to be a add-on package to what was already there, and then also would have to be an incredibly small weight, which may be true, but also at the same time, according to them, it would break the system. So since there hasn't been any restructuring of the chassis for a long time of the Abrams, and since this additional weight would actually cause structural issues with the vehicle, they believe from that evidence, therefore, there is no change to the chassis. Okay? And that's what they're basing stuff off. Now, of course, you have the Swedish tests. Everybody loves the Swedish tests. And one thing they actually do in this, which is quite interesting, is they go through the different sources that people actually write about these things. And one of the interesting problems that we've had over the last little bit is this idea where you see one piece of information and everybody extrapolates it because it fits a point that they want. One of the things that was said in one of the posts, I believe, about the Abrams or about the Leclerc, was the fact that a technical moderator was not okay using a Russian source for a French vehicle. And people took that as the fact that Gaijin do not use foreign sources for certain vehicles. And that's obviously not the case. We've literally found that yesterday when it comes to the Leopard 2s. They use the Swedish tests. And once again, we're seeing it here when it comes to the Swedish tests again. So that's just something which never was true, and it's more about the fact that the source itself from the Russian side of things was unreliable. And you can see here, you know, that whole Russian bias thing, that's kind of interesting. So you have a book here from Russia which talks about the SEP upgrade and also cannot be considered a reliable source, which is quite funny, showing that obviously they do just toss out Russian stuff too, if for them it is not seen as reliable. And the main issue with this source, the Tank T72 book, is the simple fact that the book contains errors for characteristics of Soviet tanks in comparison to other open source data available. So just from that point of view, if you were using this as a kind of barometer for what the SEP should be, even though it was straight up only published a little bit after the SEP came out, it gets a bunch of other tank statistics wrong anyway. So that source can be thrown out. Then you've also got the material license, which people talked about, which is basically the license to produce depleted uranium for the hull of the Abrams. The issue with doing this is, as they say, they don't know if it's for just the experimental vehicles or is it for more of them. Now, there surely would be a way of being able to work this out, because I'm sure you could befriend somebody who could tell you the size of the orders for these things. If it is only for 5 vehicles, then it would be quite a small order compared to the mass amount that would be required to actually upgrade the fleet of Abramses, which America has. So this could actually be a point of interest for many people who, would be going around the place because they just say they don't know. The documents don't describe whether it was for a particular modification of the tank, but for them, since the information that they've seen previously, which we talked about, is that the DU was tried on the experimental Abramses, but wasn't used on the production ones, therefore they can't make a decision on whether it should or shouldn't. So therefore they're going for the safe option of shouldn't. This does actually mean if they want to in the future, they could just add these experimental Abramses, which I'm sure they will going forward, since the one thing the Abrams is missing is the increase in protection. I'm sure that'll probably come next. And then also the M1 Abrams main battle tank owner's workshop manual, and also once again doesn't directly indicate that these have depleted uranium armor in the hull. Only general words about the upgrade from the M1A1SA. So it's also secondary and not a primary, so that kind of screws it up too, and there's nothing else backing it up and doesn't give proper wording for it. And then also the Army's Future Combat System program and alternatives. Only the use of third generation uranium armor is mentioned, no confirmation if it's on the body, and also could be talking about the turrets as usual, right? And what even is third generation? Once again, love me some classified stuff. Now, the sad thing for me is they pretty much say here why they've made the decisions that they've decided to do, and also why they are open to information if anything is different. I know the guys who are behind a lot of the source collecting when it comes to War Thunder, and they really do a ton of work when it comes to sorting these things out. There's obviously a few of them, like the Chinese dude previously, who have definitely had their problems and have not produced sufficient data for it. But I know the guy, or one of the guys, I should say, who's behind these sources for America, the British stuff, the French stuff, all of this, and they're all just really good people, and also at the same time, they are fully connected when it comes to finding all of this information. That doesnn mean that they might miss stuff. They could miss stuff at the end of the day, but Gaijin are just working with what is publicly available. And at the end of the day, what they could do is they could add a version of the Abrams with the DU armor, which would be an experimental version, which they will do at some point in the future, as you know. But at the same time, it's something which will not come to the standard versions of the game unless they find a primary source or even a bunch of secondary sources which match the fact that there is some DU inserts in the hull. And it sucks. It really does. But at the same time, this is the standards that they live by. This is the same standards they use for pretty much everything that's around the place, and there's always going to be people who are mad at that because they want to see the thing that they believe happen. But what can they do? They've laid it all out in front of you. They are trying to do the best that they can with the information that they have. You can argue about the interpretation of the data, but at the same time, is their interpretation wrong? Is other people's interpretation right? I mean, it could be, but who knows? And that's the eternal question, and why these conversations are exhausting and also just very, very annoying, because no side is correct. Basically, you have people who want the Abrams buffed, and therefore they say this should exist. And Gaijin turn around and show all of the information that they're working with, and nothing points to that from a historical standpoint. The way to actually fix this, and the way to go this, is just to go completely ahistorical with these vehicles, which is what they've done in so many different areas, with the Lanzodermat formula, with the reloads, with the general transmission and how they all work with them, depending on the vehicle itself, and even some of the autoloaders and how they work. But for some reason, this is a stumbling block for them, and therefore it's going to continue to be a point of contention and a point of aggression for many other people. For me, I would just like this conversation over. But I also know it never will be. It will just be one of those that continues infinitum, unfortunately. As always, Hope you have a wonderful day. And I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Schnitzel Stroker, Brendan Quinn, Vilneus, Character Fuel, Carrion Crow, Nicholas Richardson, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, B. Young, Opium Prime, Masonocrat, Lafouche, Alan Hacker, Sam Arslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.